In the bustling heart of London, where history and modernity intertwined seamlessly, stood Buckingham Palace, a symbol of tradition, strength, and pride. Among the countless figures who contributed to its grandeur was a young royal guard named Corporal James Whittaker. Every day, rain or shine, James stood tall outside the palace gates, his red tunic immaculate, his bearskin hat perfectly positioned atop his head. To tourists snapping photos and locals passing by, he appeared almost statue-like, unmoving, unyielding, a living embodiment of discipline. James wasn't just another face in the line of guards. He carried with him years of hard work and dedication. Born into a modest family in Yorkshire, he had always dreamed of serving something greater than himself. From an early age, he admired the precision and honor associated with being part of the Royal Guard. But the journey hadn't been easy. The rigorous training pushed him to his limits. Long marches under heavy gear, sleepless nights spent mastering protocols, and endless drills to perfect even the smallest movements. Yet through it all, James persevered, driven by a deep sense of purpose. Tourists often gathered around him, marveling at how still he could stand despite the distractions swirling around him. Children giggled as they mimicked his stance, while parents whispered stories about the centuries-old traditions he represented. Some visitors tried to make him smile or react, waving silly objects in front of his face or cracking jokes. But James remained steadfast, his eyes fixed ahead, his expression neutral. It wasn't because he lacked emotion. It was because he understood the weight of his responsibility. He was not just guarding a building. He was protecting a legacy. On this particular afternoon, the air carried a crisp chill, hinting at the coming winter. Puffs of white mist escaped James's lips as he exhaled slowly, his breath visible against the gray sky. His boots clicked sharply against the pavement when he shifted positions ever so slightly, an action so subtle that only the keenest observer might notice. Around him, life buzzed with energy. Street performers entertained crowds nearby, their music floating through the air like a cheerful melody. Vendors called out to passers-by, offering hot cocoa and roasted chestnuts. Amidst the lively atmosphere, James stood apart, not detached, but grounded, a silent sentinel amidst the chaos. Despite the festive vibes surrounding him, James's mind stayed sharp. Years of training taught him to remain alert, no matter how calm things seemed on the surface. He scanned the crowd subtly, taking note of faces, gestures, and interactions. Most people were harmless, eager to soak in the magic of the palace grounds. But experience had also taught him that danger could come unexpectedly, disguised in ordinary forms. So while he may have looked relaxed to outsiders, every fiber of his being was ready to respond if needed. As the clock ticked closer to evening, shadows began stretching across the cobblestone streets. The golden glow of the setting sun bathed the palace in warm light, casting long reflections on the windows. James adjusted his posture slightly, ensuring his stance remained impeccable. Little did he know, this peaceful moment would soon be shattered by an encounter that would test not only his training but also his character. For now, though, he stood firm, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. As the day began to wind down and the golden hues of sunset painted the sky, a man strode toward the palace gates with an air of arrogance that immediately set him apart from the cheerful tourists milling about. His name was Marcus Hale, a well-dressed but deeply unpleasant individual. Marcus's insults had failed to shake James, and the growing disapproval from the crowd only fueled his frustration. He hated being ignored, especially in front of so many witnesses. To him, James's silence wasn't a sign of strength. It was an affront, a challenge he couldn't let slide. His eyes darted around, searching for a way to regain control of the situation. That's when his gaze landed on the large German shepherd sitting obediently by his side, its leash coiled loosely in his hand. The dog, named Titan, was no ordinary pet. Trained as a guard dog, it was powerful, intimidating, and fiercely loyal to Marcus. For years, Marcus had used Titan as a tool to intimidate others, whether it was barking at strangers who dared to question him or lunging at people who crossed his path. Today, Marcus saw an opportunity to use Titan to break James's composure. After all, how could anyone remain calm in the face of such a threat? With a cruel smirk, Marcus unclipped the leash and gave Titan a sharp command. "Get him." The dog sprang into action, its muscles rippling beneath its sleek coat as it charged toward James. A collective gasp swept through the crowd as Titan's teeth gleamed dangerously close to James's legs. The dog barked ferociously, its deep growls reverberating through the air like thunder. Panic rippled through the onlookers. Some screamed, clutching their children tightly. Others scrambled backward, desperate to put distance between themselves and the chaos unfolding before them. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Everyone expected James to react, to flinch, step back, or even shout in alarm. But instead, he remained perfectly still, his posture unwavering. His eyes locked onto Titan, not with fear, but with an intense focus that seemed almost unnatural. It was as if he had anticipated this very moment, preparing himself mentally for anything that might come his way. The crowd watched in stunned silence, unsure whether to admire James's bravery or worry about what might happen next. Titan circled James cautiously, snapping his jaws and snarling loudly. Saliva dripped from his sharp teeth as he lunged again, this time closer than before. Yet James didn't move. Not a single muscle twitched. Instead, he lowered his voice just enough for Titan to hear, issuing a firm but calm command. "Sit." The effect was immediate. Titan froze mid-lunge, his ears perking up as if surprised by the authority in James's tone. For a brief second, there was hesitation. But then, astonishingly, the dog obeyed. With a low whine, Titan sat down right in front of James, his tail thumping against the ground. The crowd erupted into murmurs of disbelief. How could James manage to command such a dangerous animal with just one word? Even Marcus looked taken aback, his smug expression faltering as he realized his plan had backfired spectacularly. Titan, usually so aggressive under Marcus's orders, now sat placidly, gazing up at James as though waiting for further instructions. It was a surreal sight, one that left everyone questioning who truly held power in this confrontation. Marcus, however, refused to accept defeat, his face flushed red with anger, and he began shouting louder, urging Titan to attack again. "Go on. Get him," he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. But Titan didn't budge. Instead, the dog tilted its head slightly, as if confused by the conflicting commands. James, sensing the tension, kept his voice steady and commanding. "Stay," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Titan responded instantly, remaining seated despite Marcus's frantic attempts to regain control. As the scene unfolded, the crowd's initial fear transformed into awe. People exchanged astonished glances, whispering about what they were witnessing. Some began clapping softly, their applause growing louder as the reality of the situation sank in. James hadn't just neutralized the threat. He had done so with remarkable poise and skill. Meanwhile, Marcus's fury reached new heights. Humiliated and enraged, he yanked at Titan's collar, trying to drag the dog away. But even Titan resisted, straining against Marcus's grip, as if unwilling to leave James's presence. What started as a cruel act of provocation had turned into something entirely unexpected, a testament to discipline, patience, and the unshakable resolve of a man who refused to be broken. And while Marcus fumed, realizing he had lost control of both the situation and his own dog, James stood tall, proving that true strength lies not in aggression, but in calmness under pressure. The moment Titan sat down in front of James, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. What had started as a tense and chaotic scene transformed into something almost surreal, a standoff between man and beast, with Marcus caught helplessly in the middle. James's calm demeanor never wavered, even as Marcus continued to shout and tug at the dog's collar. The crowd, now fully invested in the unfolding drama, watched with bated breath, their eyes darting between James, Titan, and Marcus. James knew he couldn't let his guard down. Not yet. While Titan was no longer lunging or barking, the situation was far from resolved. Marcus's erratic behavior made it clear that he wasn't going to back down anytime soon. And though Titan appeared obedient for now, dogs were unpredictable creatures by nature. One wrong move could reignite the tension and put everyone, James included, at risk. So James relied on the training that had been drilled into him over years of service: stay composed, assess the situation, and act decisively when necessary. With slow, deliberate movements, James adjusted his stance slightly, ensuring he remained balanced and ready to respond if needed. He kept his voice firm, but measured, issuing commands to Titan in short, authoritative phrases. "Stay," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. To the onlookers, it seemed almost magical how Titan responded instantly, sitting perfectly still despite Marcus's frantic attempts to pull him away. But this wasn't magic. It was skill, born from experience and understanding. Years ago, during his early days of training, James had worked closely with military working dogs. These highly trained animals were taught to follow commands with precision, responding not just to words, but also to tone and body language. James quickly learned that dogs, like humans, responded best to confidence and consistency. If you hesitated or showed fear, they sensed it immediately. But if you projected calm authority, they trusted you implicitly. This knowledge served him well now, as he faced off against Titan, and indirectly Marcus. As the seconds ticked by, Marcus grew increasingly agitated. His face flushed red, and veins bulged in his neck as he screamed at both James and Titan. "You useless mutt!" He spat, yanking hard on the leash. "Attack him. Do what I say." But Titan ignored him completely, his attention fixed solely on James. It was as if the dog recognized the difference between Marcus's frantic energy and James's steady presence. To Titan, James wasn't just another figure. He was someone who exuded control and reliability, qualities that inspired loyalty. The crowd began to murmur again, their voices tinged with admiration and disbelief. Some whispered about how remarkable it was that James had managed to tame such a ferocious animal with just a few words. Others openly criticized Marcus, calling him out for his cruelty and lack of control. A young woman near the front raised her phone to record the scene, her hands trembling slightly as she captured every detail. "This is insane," she muttered to her friend, shaking her head. "That guy doesn't deserve a dog like that." Meanwhile, Marcus's frustration boiled over into rage. Realizing he was losing not only the battle for Titan's obedience, but also the respect of the crowd, he lashed out verbally once more. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" He snarled at James, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone? You're nothing but a glorified statue." James didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he took a subtle step forward, maintaining eye contact with Titan while addressing Marcus directly. "Sir," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "you are disturbing public peace and endangering lives. I suggest you regain control of your dog before someone gets hurt." His words carried weight, not because they were shouted, but because they were delivered with quiet authority. The contrast between James's composure and Marcus's fury was striking, and it didn't go unnoticed by the crowd. For a brief moment, Marcus faltered. His grip on the leash loosened slightly, and his shoulders slumped as he realized the tide had turned against him. People around him were recording, clapping, and cheering for James, their support echoing through the air. Even Titan seemed to side with James, ignoring Marcus's commands entirely. It was a humiliating defeat, one that left Marcus seething with anger, but powerless to change the outcome. And yet James wasn't done. Knowing that the situation required de-escalation, he softened his tone slightly, speaking directly to Titan. "Good boy," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. Titan wagged his tail in response, clearly pleased with the praise. The simple gesture disarmed the tension further, reminding everyone that beneath all the hostility, there was still humanity and hope. By the time police officers arrived to intervene, the crowd had already made. The arrival of the police officers marked a turning point in the tense standoff. Their authoritative presence immediately commanded attention, cutting through the chaos like a sharp blade. Dressed in crisp uniforms and exuding professionalism, they approached the scene with calm efficiency. One officer stepped forward, addressing Marcus directly, while another moved to assess the safety of the crowd. "Sir," the lead officer said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument, "we've received reports of a disturbance. Can you explain what's going on here?" Marcus, still fuming from his humiliating loss of control over Titan, tried to salvage whatever scraps of dignity he had left. He straightened his posture, attempting to appear indignant rather than guilty. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, pointing an accusing finger at James. "Your guard provoked my dog. I was just trying to handle the situation." His voice carried a defensive edge, but it lacked conviction. Even as he spoke, his grip on Titan's leash tightened nervously, betraying his unease. James, ever composed, didn't respond to Marcus's accusations. Instead, he allowed the events to speak for themselves. The crowd, eager to share their perspective, began recounting everything they had witnessed. A middle-aged woman stepped forward, her arms crossed and her expression stern. "That man unleashed his dog on the guard," she declared, gesturing toward Marcus. "It was completely unprovoked. The guard didn't do anything wrong. He handled it perfectly." Others quickly chimed in, their voices overlapping in a chorus of support for James. "He saved the situation," added a young man holding his phone, which still displayed the video he had recorded. "If it weren't for him, who knows what could have happened." Another bystander shook her head in disgust as she looked at Marcus. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she said bluntly. "Using a dog like that. It's cruel and cowardly." The weight of public opinion pressed heavily on Marcus, whose attempts to justify his actions grew increasingly desperate. "I was testing him," he insisted, his voice rising in pitch. "Anyone in my position would want to ensure these guards are capable of handling threats." But his words fell flat. The officers exchanged skeptical glances, clearly unimpressed by his feeble excuses. Meanwhile, Titan remained seated obediently beside James, further undermining Marcus's claims of provocation. Seeing that Marcus was losing credibility, one of the officers turned to James. "Corporal Whitaker, can you provide your account of what happened?" he asked respectfully. James nodded, speaking in measured tones as he recounted the events without embellishment or emotion. He described how Marcus had approached him with verbal abuse, escalated the situation by releasing Titan, and refused to regain control of his dog despite repeated warnings. Throughout his explanation, James maintained eye contact with the officer, projecting honesty and reliability. As James spoke, the crowd continued to murmur their approval. Some even applauded softly, prompting Marcus to whirl around angrily. "Stop clapping for him," he shouted, his face reddening with embarrassment. "He's nothing special. You're all brainwashed by this spectacle." But his outburst only made things worse. The more he ranted, the more unhinged he appeared, further alienating himself from the people around him. Finally, the officers intervened decisively. One of them addressed Marcus sternly. "Sir, based on witness statements and our observations, we believe you violated public order laws. We'll need you to come with us to answer some questions." Before Marcus could protest, another officer gently took hold of Titan's leash, guiding the dog away from him. To everyone's surprise, and perhaps delight, Titan followed willingly, trotting alongside the officer as if relieved to be free of Marcus's erratic behavior. With Marcus being led away, the tension dissipated almost instantly. The crowd erupted into applause once again, this time louder and more enthusiastic. People cheered for James, calling out compliments and expressing gratitude for his bravery. A child wearing a miniature replica of a Royal Guard uniform ran up to him, grinning ear to ear. "You're my hero," the boy exclaimed before being gently ushered back by his parents. Despite the adoration surrounding him, James remained humble, offering only a slight nod of acknowledgement. In the aftermath of the confrontation, James reflected quietly on what had transpired. While the incident had been unsettling, it reinforced his belief in the importance of discipline and restraint. By staying calm and focused, he hadn't just diffused a dangerous situation. He had demonstrated the values he stood for: honor, integrity, and service. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across Buckingham Palace, as the police escorted Marcus away, his protests grew louder, echoing through the streets as he struggled against their grip. "This is absurd," he shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. "I didn't do anything wrong. That guard manipulated everyone. He's the one who should be questioned." But his words were drowned out by the cheers of the crowd, who had turned their backs on him entirely. To them, Marcus was no longer a figure of authority or even a man worth listening to. He was simply someone whose actions had exposed his own flaws, leaving him isolated and defeated. The officers handled Marcus firmly but professionally, ensuring that the situation remained under control. One of them read him his rights while another secured Titan, leading the dog away with a gentle hand. Despite Marcus's earlier claims of dominance over the animal, Titan seemed perfectly content to follow the officer's commands. In fact, the dog appeared almost relieved to be away from Marcus's erratic behavior. As they walked off, Titan glanced back briefly at James, his tail wagging slightly before disappearing into the distance. It was a small but telling moment, one that underscored just how much respect the dog had developed for James in such a short time. Back at the palace gates, the atmosphere slowly returned to normal. The crowd lingered for a while longer, buzzing with excitement as they discussed what they had witnessed. Some people approached James cautiously, wanting to thank him personally without breaking protocol. A young couple stepped forward, the woman holding a bouquet of flowers she had purchased from a nearby vendor. "We know you're not supposed to acknowledge us," she said softly, "but we wanted to say thank you. You were incredible." James gave a slight nod, his expression softening ever so slightly. Though he couldn't respond verbally due to the rules of his position, his acknowledgement meant the world to those around him. Others followed suit, offering words of encouragement and admiration. A teenage girl shyly handed him a note scribbled on a piece of paper. "You inspired me today," it read. "Thank you for showing us what true strength looks like." Such gestures reminded James that his role wasn't just about guarding a historic building. It was about representing values that resonated deeply with people. Meanwhile, news of the incident spread rapidly beyond the immediate scene. Videos captured by onlookers began circulating online within minutes, drawing reactions from all corners of the globe. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags praising James's composure and condemning Marcus's behavior. Journalists stationed near Buckingham Palace quickly picked up the story, interviewing witnesses and capturing footage of the aftermath. Within hours, headlines proclaimed James's actions as heroic, highlighting the stark contrast between his professionalism and Marcus's aggression. For Marcus, however, the consequences were far less forgiving. At the police station, he faced questioning about his decision to unleash Titan in a public space and his racially charged remarks toward James. Witnesses' statements painted a damning picture of his behavior, leaving little room for denial. When asked why he had acted so recklessly, Marcus stumbled over his answers, alternately blaming James, the crowd, and even Titan for the escalation. His attempts to shift responsibility only made him appear more guilty, further solidifying the case against him. By the end of the night, Marcus found himself facing multiple charges, including inciting violence, endangering public safety, and violating animal welfare laws. News outlets reported extensively on his arrest, digging into his past and uncovering previous incidents where he had exhibited similar behavior. Friends and acquaintances distanced themselves publicly, eager to avoid association with someone whose actions had sparked widespread outrage. For Marcus, The fallout was swift and severe, a harsh reminder that cruelty and arrogance rarely go unpunished. As the day drew to a close, James stood once again at his post, resuming his silent vigil outside Buckingham Palace. The chaos of the afternoon felt like a distant memory, replaced by the familiar rhythm of life around him. Streetlights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the cobblestone streets. Tourists continued to snap photos, though now many paused to smile warmly at James before moving along. Though he couldn't show it outwardly, James felt a quiet sense of gratitude for the support of strangers, for the lessons learned during training, and for the opportunity to serve something greater than himself. In the days that followed, the incident became a topic of conversation not just in London but across the world. People marveled at James's ability to remain calm under pressure, using skill and discipline to diffuse a potentially dangerous situation. More importantly, in the days following the incident, Corporal James Whittaker's name became synonymous with courage and composure. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story. A young royal guard standing firm against hatred and chaos, turning what could have been a tragedy into a moment of inspiration. Social media buzzed with praise for James, as videos of the encounter continued to rack up millions of views. Memes, fan art, and heartfelt messages flooded platforms, celebrating not just his actions, but also the values he represented. For many, James wasn't just a soldier. He was a symbol of hope in an increasingly divided world. The royal family themselves took notice of James's remarkable conduct. In a rare public statement, they commended him for embodying the principles of duty, honor, and resilience that define their institution. Corporal Whittaker's response to a challenging situation reminds us all of the importance of grace under pressure. The statement read, "His actions reflect the best of what it means to serve, not only as a member of the Royal Guard, but as a citizen of the world." The acknowledgement carried significant weight, elevating James from a respected figure to a celebrated hero. Despite the attention, James remained humble. When reporters approached him during his off-duty hours, he politely declined interviews, citing the need to focus on his responsibilities. However, when asked about the incident during a brief interaction with palace officials, he offered a simple yet profound reflection. "I wasn't thinking about myself at the time. I was focused on protecting those around me." His words resonated deeply, capturing the essence of selflessness that had inspired so many. For Marcus Hale, the aftermath was starkly different. Legal proceedings moved swiftly, painting a damning picture of his behavior. Witnesses testified about his verbal abuse, his reckless decision to unleash Titan, and his refusal to take responsibility for the escalating situation. Animal welfare organizations also weighed in, criticizing Marcus's treatment of Titan and questioning whether he was fit to own such a powerful animal. Evidence emerged showing previous complaints filed against Marcus for similar incidents, further tarnishing his reputation. During court hearings, Marcus attempted to defend himself, claiming he had merely been testing James's abilities and never intended to cause harm. But his excuses rang hollow, especially when confronted with video footage and witness accounts that contradicted his version of events. The judge presiding over the case delivered a stern rebuke, emphasizing the seriousness of Marcus's actions. "Your behavior endangered lives and disrespected the very traditions you claim to value," the judge declared. "This court will not tolerate such conduct." Marcus ultimately faced hefty fines, mandatory anger management courses, and restrictions on owning pets in the future. Beyond the legal penalties, the social consequences proved equally severe. Friends distanced themselves, colleagues avoided him, and even casual acquaintances hesitated to associate with him publicly. Once seen as a man of influence, Marcus now found himself ostracized, a cautionary tale of how unchecked prejudice and arrogance can lead to ruin. Back at Buckingham Palace, life returned to its usual rhythm, but with one notable difference. Visitors flocked to see James, eager to catch a glimpse of the guard who had captured global admiration. Children pointed excitedly at him, whispering stories of bravery to their parents. Others waited patiently nearby, hoping to express their gratitude or simply share a smile. Though James maintained his stoic demeanor, there were moments when his eyes softened, betraying a hint of warmth beneath his disciplined exterior. Privately, James reflected on the impact of the incident. While he appreciated the recognition, he understood that the real victory lay in sparking meaningful conversations. People were talking openly about racism, respect, and the importance of standing up to injustice, not just in grand gestures but in everyday choices. Teachers used his story to inspire students, community leaders referenced it in speeches, and families discussed it around dinner tables. James realized that his actions had become part of something larger, a movement toward understanding and unity. As weeks passed, the crowds thinned slightly, but the memory of that day lingered. Tour guides began incorporating the story into their narratives, describing James's calm resolve and the crowd's reaction with pride. Even tourists who hadn't witnessed the event firsthand felt connected to it, snapping photos of James with renewed appreciation. For them, he wasn't just guarding a palace, he was safeguarding ideals worth preserving. James knew that moments like these came rarely in life. They tested character, revealed truths, and left lasting impressions. As he stood watch outside Buckingham Palace, gazing, weeks turned into months, and life around Buckingham Palace settled into its familiar rhythm once again. The golden gates stood tall, welcoming visitors from all corners of the globe, while Corporal James Whittaker resumed his duties with the same quiet dedication that had always defined him. To the tourists who passed by, he might have seemed like any other guard, stoic, disciplined, and unwavering in his post. But for those who knew the story of what had happened on that fateful afternoon, James was more than just a figure in a red tunic and bearskin hat. He was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of hatred and chaos, grace and courage could prevail. The incident continued to resonate far beyond the palace walls. Schools began incorporating James's actions into lessons about leadership and conflict resolution. Teachers used his example to teach students the importance of staying calm under pressure and treating others with respect, regardless of provocation. In community centers and workplaces, leaders referenced his composure as a model for handling difficult situations. Imagine if we all responded to hostility with the same level of patience and dignity, one speaker said during a workshop. What kind of world could we create? For James, the recognition came in small but meaningful ways. Strangers approached him during his breaks, thanking him for inspiring them to stand up against prejudice in their own lives. A young man training to become a police officer told James how his story motivated him to pursue a career in public service. An elderly woman handed him a letter expressing her gratitude, saying she had lost faith in humanity until she witnessed his actions. These moments stayed with James, reminding him that even the smallest acts of integrity could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he might never fully understand. Meanwhile, Marcus Hale faded into obscurity, his name occasionally mentioned as a cautionary tale. His legal troubles served as a wake-up call for some, sparking discussions about accountability and the consequences of unchecked behavior. Local organizations launched initiatives aimed at addressing racism and promoting inclusivity, using Marcus's downfall as an example of why such efforts were necessary. Though he remained largely absent from public view, his story became a stark contrast to James, a reminder of how arrogance and cruelty can isolate individuals, while humility and courage bring people together. Back at the palace, James found himself reflecting on the broader impact of his actions. He realized that the true power of that day wasn't in the specific events themselves, but in the conversations they sparked. People were talking openly about topics that often went unaddressed: racism, empathy, and the value of standing firm in one's principles. Families discussed these issues over dinner. Friends debated them online, and communities organized events to foster understanding. It was a shift James hadn't anticipated, but one he welcomed wholeheartedly. As seasons changed and winter gave way to spring, James noticed something new among the crowds visiting Buckingham Palace. There was a sense of unity, a shared appreciation for the traditions and values the palace represented. Children waved enthusiastically at him, their faces lighting up when he gave them a subtle nod. Parents pointed him out as a role model, telling stories of bravery and kindness to their wide-eyed youngsters. Even fellow guards joked good-naturedly about his newfound fame, teasing him with mock applause whenever they crossed paths. Through it all, James remained grounded. He understood that his role wasn't about seeking admiration. It was about serving something greater than himself. Yet he couldn't deny the profound effect the incident had on his perspective. It reinforced his belief in the importance of discipline, not just in maintaining order but in fostering trust and respect. Every time he stood watch, every time he greeted a visitor with a polite nod, he carried with him the knowledge that his actions mattered, not just to those watching, but to the ideals he represented. One crisp morning, as sunlight bathed the palace grounds in a warm glow, James paused briefly during a shift change to take in the scene around him. Tourists laughed and chatted, vendors called out cheerful greetings, and the distant sound of music drifted through the air. For a moment, everything felt peaceful, a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity. James adjusted his posture slightly, ensuring his stance remained impeccable, and returned to his post. Though the world outside the palace gates would always be unpredictable, James knew one thing for certain. Strength wasn't measured by force or aggression. It was found in